Leaving the wedding, the bride wandered through the park in tears. And when the wealthy woman noticed a mute beggar asking for food, Emily walked through the park, trying not to notice the stares of passers-by who were avoiding her. It was understandable. It's not every day you encounter a tearful bride in a magnificent wedding dress on the path. What was it? Tears of joy impossible to contain, or sorrow, when every fiber of her being prayed for sadness and longing? Emily herself leaned towards the latter version. She didn't want to get married, but her father, Kevin Adams, had decided for her once again, as he always did, in his own way. Emily walked along the path, as if trying to escape her fate, which just a couple of hours ago had made further amendments to her life. This part of the park was sparsely populated. But on the central path, there were always many people, schoolchildren, mothers with strollers, and grandmothers out for a breath of fresh air. Because of this, there was always an indescribable cheerful noise there. Babies cried or laughed joyfully, children shouted every time they saw a squirrel or pigeons. On this side path, it was almost deserted, except for a couple of vagrants who had settled in the shade of trees. They sat a little apart from each other on pieces of cardboard laid on the ground. Nearby, a fairly large dog of mixed breed named Ruby roamed around, sniffing tree trunks and pretending to be a real tracker. Ruby had been found injured on the roadside by one of the vagrants. Apparently, Ruby had been hit by a car speeding by, which had thrown him to the side. Without human intervention, the dog would surely have died. His injuries were quite serious, but Ruby's strong constitution kept him alive. Fortunately, a young man happened to pass by and immediately picked up the dog and carried him off in an unknown direction. Of course, the homeless man didn't have money for a vet visit, so he took care of Ruby's treatment himself. He bought bandages, iodine, and some anti-inflammatory drugs. Ruby had only one chance in 1,000 to survive, and he seized it with all his might. Now Ruby trotted happily behind the vagrant couple, whom he considered his owners. Sitting on their cardboard mats, the homeless men watched passers-by attentively, sincerely hoping for some help. Occasionally, the more lively one of them begged for alms, although this endeavor brought him little success. Of course, they could have sat on one of the empty benches nearby, which would have been much more comfortable. But the vagrants were experienced and didn't want to be driven away. This couple didn't get along very well. For example, Jack Smith liked to drink heavily, after which he would sing songs and taunt passers-by. His companion, on the other hand, was more calm and balanced. He never liked alcohol, nor could he shout at the top of his lungs. And there was a special reason for this. Charlie was mute, and therefore could only communicate through gestures. Jack often complained about having such a laconic companion, but that's the fate of vagabonds, who often bring together two completely different people. Seeing the bride in a white dress walking along the path, Jack noticeably perked up. "You see, Charlie, what a beauty. Oh, if only I could shed a few pounds and have a new suit, I wouldn't miss my chance for sure." Charlie glanced briefly at the tearful Emily and awkwardly lowered his gaze. Jack grumbled something, then refocused on the bride, who seemed oblivious to their presence. The beggar hesitated for a moment, then boldly asked, "Ma'am, would you like to help out a poor class?" As a gesture of goodwill, so to speak. Upon hearing the unfamiliar voice, Emily flinched and, fighting back tears, whispered, "How can I help you?" Charlie looked disapprovingly at his companion and tried to signal him to stop begging, but Jack was unstoppable. "Well, how to help, ma'am?" "Just a small coin, of course." "How else?" the beggar said. At that moment, Charlie was ready to incinerate his companion with his glare. For some reason he couldn't understand, he felt sympathy for this girl, whose life today seemed to be undergoing such important changes. "To help, you say? Well, I will help you. Only I have no money. But here, take this," Emily said with a trembling voice, then swiftly removed a small object hanging on a thin cord from her neck. From the way it gleamed in the sunlight, Jack immediately knew it was gold. Probably a ring. Though it could be costume jewelry. Not necessarily. The beggar's eyes greedily sparkled, and his hands instinctively reached for the intriguing little object. Just another moment and he would become the owner of a real treasure. But to his immense disappointment, Emily handed the ring to the astonished Charlie, who, truth be told, hadn't asked for anything. "Ah, some people have all the luck. Don't forget to predict my fortune at least, fortune teller." "It's a fine little thing," Jack couldn't help but say. Charlie carefully took the ring in his hands, as if it were a relic, then tucked it into the pocket of his worn-out jacket. Throughout all this, he couldn't shake off the awkward and embarrassed feeling brought on by the incident in the park. He hadn't had time to examine the ring closely. Besides, doing so in front of Jack was definitely not a good idea. He was already ready to incinerate him with his gaze. There was no need to make him nervous again. Since Charlie couldn't say anything, he nodded in gratitude and pressed his right hand to his heart. Emily became flustered and shifted her gaze to his companion. "He's mute, miss. Pay him no mind. He showed up around here a month ago. Doesn't remember his past, and we don't ask much about it either," Jack explained politely. Emily looked at Charlie with pity. His cheeks overgrown with thick stubble and uncut hair nearly covering his ears. Suddenly, Charlie's face seemed vaguely familiar to her. The same gaze, the characteristic oval of the face. In that moment, Emily was almost ready to believe that even the vagrant had a noticeable dimple on his chin. Just like her Thomas had. Though now it was likely hidden beneath the thick beard. Dear Lord, could it be possible? Still not understanding what was happening, Charlie anxiously glanced at the bride, dressed in white. The silent visual duel lasted several seconds, broken by a male voice. "Emily, what took you so long? You said you were just going to get some fresh air," the voice said reproachfully. The astonished vagrants identified him unmistakably as the groom in his expensive suit. "Sorry, Ed, time got away from me. I just wanted a short walk, and my feet led me here," Emily replied, striving for a natural tone. The groom frowned, lips pursed in annoyance. "All right, you've had your stroll. Let's head back now. Guests are waiting. And your parents are worried. I hope those beggars didn't bother you." Wanting to defuse the situation, Emily immediately approached her fiancé, touching his shoulder. "No, darling, everything's fine. Really. Let's go back," she said. Ed Miller smirked triumphantly and gave the vagrants a disdainful look. Seated next to Charlie, Ruby growled softly, causing the fur on his nape to bristle instantly. Sensing the tension in the air, Jack lowered his gaze, realizing it was best not to anger this wealthy man. Who knows, he might try to assert himself in front of the bride and end up with a couple of slaps. Only Charlie, stroking Ruby's neck, met the groom's gaze with stoic calmness. The wealthy man frowned and cleared his throat displeasingly. "So, you have quite the beast there. Say, haven't we met before? Your face seems oddly familiar to me," he asked. Charlie shook his head, indicating that this was their first meeting. Fortunately, Ed didn't dwell on it, instead taking the bride by the hand and leading her towards the exit, where the restaurant salute awaited. Jack Smith watched the departing couple with disdain and muttered, "Well, look who's here, the hero himself. I could do the same if I had as much money as he does. Right, Charlie?" Charlie nodded in agreement, although he did so more out of respect and tact than shared interests. He didn't like his friend's remark. Besides, Charlie still couldn't shake off the memory of that ring his fiancée had given him. It bore a striking resemblance to something he had seen before, but he couldn't examine it closely at the moment. Jack stared at him intently. If he saw the ring again, he might just burn it to ashes. "Come on, Charlie, stop beating around the bush. Go to the pawn shop, pawn the ring, and while you're at it, grab something from the deli on your way back. You don't need me to tell you that. Have a drink there, grab a snack. Okay? Meanwhile, I'll go with Ruby to the drop-off point, take care of something to make a few bucks," Jack spoke up again. Charlie mechanically nodded, though he had no intention of pawning the gift. He had a special reason for keeping it. Waving goodbye to Jack, he rose from his makeshift seat and headed towards the exit. Ruby initially seemed like she wanted to follow, but then settled down and stayed with the other vagrant. Passing by the restaurant, Charlie couldn't help but notice the grandeur of the wedding being held inside. Loud music filled the air, and slightly intoxicated guests spilled out onto the street, eager to refresh themselves and boast about their luxury cars parked outside. Charlie quickened his pace involuntarily, hoping to go unnoticed. He knew all too well how harsh people could be towards vagrants, especially when they were in high spirits and seeking new adventures. But today, the businessman standing at the entrance didn't care whether he was a beggar or not. The bride's father spared no expense on the wedding. He threw so much money around it was frightening. Everything had to be top-notch for his beloved daughter. As Charlie slipped his hand into his pocket, he touched the ring his fiancée had given him. I wonder why she gave it to me specifically. And how did she part with such a valuable item? She must have worn it for a reason. Probably not cheap, Charlie thought as he made his way to the city hospital. Charlie intended to talk to someone who could confirm whether his assumptions were correct or not. The young vagrant needed to see Mia, a nurse from the trauma ward, who had nursed him for several days. 6 months ago, Charlie was found in a roadside ditch with a head injury. He had no money or documents on him. It was only by chance that a small yellow metal ring was discovered in the lining of his jacket. No one knew where it had come from, as Charlie himself showed signs of traumatic amnesia and muteness caused by a severe concussion. Some speculated he had simply found it on the street and kept it. Others thought Charlie had stolen it from someone and had been punished with a beating for disciplinary purposes. Regardless, the ring still remained with Charlie. After all, the item was found in his pockets, which nominally meant it belonged to him. The attending doctor suspected that Charlie's muteness was likely not congenital but a result of a head injury he sustained during the attack. Consequently, many of the nurses in the ward were openly irritated with the vagrant who ended up in their department. Only Mia continued to care for him. Later, when Charlie regained consciousness upon learning about the existence of the ring, he promptly gifted it to his savior. What else could he give Mia in gratitude? A kind word is good, but something more substantial is better. Especially since Charlie himself couldn't recall where the ring came from or how it ended up in his pocket. Therefore, he parted with it easily and without regret. However, after coming across a similar ring in his hands today, Charlie decided to compare it with what Mia had. Perhaps this would help him remember his real name and surname. Fortunately, luck was clearly on his side today. Charlie had barely entered the hospital courtyard when he bumped into Mia, who was carrying a bag of fresh linens for the laundry. "Oh, Charlie's come to visit. Thanks for not forgetting. How are you? How's your memory?" "Speech functions," the orderly chattered cheerfully. Charlie smiled and shook his head negatively, indicating that he remained a mute vagrant without a past. In fact, without a future either. "Oh, I was really hoping you'd remember everything. Professor Penn said all brain functions would recover, it just takes time and self-work. You are following the doctor's recommendations, right? You are, aren't you?" Charlie nodded affirmatively and smiled again. Honestly, he enjoyed talking to this kind woman who treated him with such warmth. Taking the bag of laundry from Mia's hands, Charlie obediently followed her. "Don't worry, Charlie, your memory will come back, everything will be fine. Though maybe you're not really Charlie at all. That's just what I called you in memory of my brother. He died. He was a helicopter pilot, worked in the emergency services. But never mind. What did you come for? Just to visit, or is there something you need?" Mia continued her one-sided dialogue. Charlie stopped, then placed the load on a bench and looked hopefully into her eyes. "What is it, Charlie? Come on, tell me, don't be afraid. You know I'll help however I can. Even if you need to explain with gestures. I'm not a foolish woman. You know that." Charlie was a bit embarrassed, then retrieved a ring from his pocket, hanging on a thin cord. "Wow. Is this it? Do you have a bunch of them and a little cart? Let me take a closer look. No, I don't think so. There's still a difference. On the other hand, it would be good to compare them, of course, because I can't say from memory. Charlie's eyes sparkled. Well done, Mia, you've got a sharp mind. At a glance, she understood what he wanted to say to her. Not everyone can do that. Look at Jack, no matter how much you explain with gestures, he won't understand anything until you write it down. But what Mia said a little later confused Charlie's plans. Charlie, don't be upset, but I can't compare the rings. You see, I pawned your gift at the pawnshop 2 days ago. I really needed the money. You know how it is, I have 3 kids. My husband doesn't earn much, so we can't afford much. Anyway, it was our eldest's birthday recently. He had been dreaming of a smartphone for a long time. So, I pawned your ring. Not completely, though. I hope to redeem it. Well, we'll see how it goes. Charlie frowned. He had hoped for Mia's help. Because if the rings had turned out to be identical, Charlie could have guessed that there was a connection between him and the beautiful bride-to-be. Maybe friendly, maybe even familial. Don't be sad, Charlie. If you want, I can write a note for you, so that you can go to the appraiser at the pawnshop and compare. Maybe he can help you with something. The rings do look very similar. I would even say they're like 2 peas in a pod. The appraiser at the pawnshop, as soon as he saw it, reached for the money right away. He said the gold is very good, and the hallmark is high. A glimmer of hope appeared in Charlie's eyes. Perhaps thanks to this ring, he could unravel the mystery of his past, which had treated him so cruelly. Looking meaningfully into Mia's eyes, he made a characteristic gesture with his hand, as if tracing invisible letters in the air. Ah, this. The note. Of course. Right away, Charlie. I happen to have a note. Well, on one side there was a prescription written. But that won't bother you. I'll write on the blank side, Mia guessed. Soon Charlie was holding the coveted note in his hand, which he intended to take to the pawnshop for further clarification. Take care of yourself, Charlie, okay? And drop by sometime. And follow the doctor's recommendations, all right? Mia said as a farewell. Charlie waved goodbye and headed towards the exit of the hospital. Meanwhile, at the Salute restaurant, a wedding celebration was in full swing. Amidst the lively music, guests danced and shouted over each other. Only the bride felt miserable at this celebration of life. Whenever guests demanded kisses, Emily's eyes filled with bitter tears. God, why is all this happening to me? If only Thomas were here now, I wouldn't be crying like this, thought the bride. The groom, on the other hand, felt like the master of the situation, basking in the rays of attention and glory, downing one shot after another. Why are you so tense? Is something wrong? Relax, it's our celebration after all. Isn't it? He whispered stealthily into Emily's ear. Emily managed a weary smile and glanced at her father. Sitting at the table, Kevin Adams looked confident. But Emily knew that couldn't be further from the truth. This whole affair, from the betrothal to the restaurant, had been conducted more out of obligation than plan. Emily, I'm ill. The doctors won't give any forecasts. They say it could be just months. And with Ed, you'll be better off. Plus, his father is a successful businessman. You know my line of work isn't easy for just anyone. I fear that if something happens to me, you won't be able to handle it all, Emily's father confided shortly before the wedding. Dad, you know I love Thomas and I'm willing to wait for him forever, she countered. Kevin Adams snorted in disbelief. Easy for you to say when time's on your side. But I can't wait any longer, darling. Do you understand? Emily looked at her father with sadness. Could he really marry her off to this man who cared only for money and nothing else? Oh, if only Thomas were here right now. He would surely stand up for her, protect her. After all, only his father was willing to listen day and night. Understandable, since he was the company's lead geologist with a natural talent for finding gold veins and diamond deposits. Since childhood, Thomas had been drawn to the romance of distant travels, hiking trips, and camping under the stars. As her classmate, he had always looked after her, whether picking flowers from the garden or offering to carry her school bag. He grew up in a low-income family, where his father worked as a mechanic at a factory and his mother as a technician at a school. Never mind. When I grow up, I'll become a geologist, find gold, and become rich, Thomas dreamily smiled. Emily didn't put much stock in her friends' tales and regarded them skeptically. Come on, gold? First you have to find it, and here you are just talking big. It's not as easy as books make it out to be. But Thomas stood firm, and after school, he successfully entered the Geological Exploration University on his first attempt. At that time, there was no romantic relationship between him and Emily. There was certainly mutual fondness, but more on a friendly level than the kind between a man and a woman in love. Following her father's advice, Emily went on to study economics. Kevin Adams always said that a good economist would certainly be an asset to his company. Emily knew that everything her father had, he had earned through hard work. Kevin Adams had faced many challenges before achieving success and being able to save enough money to start his own business. Originally, it was a small firm specializing in amber extraction. It was later, when Kevin got back on his feet a bit, that he switched to a profitable yet more dangerous endeavor, gold mining. It was to Kevin Adamson that Thomas came to work after graduating from university. Emily vividly remembered the joyous expression on Thomas's face when he came for the interview. Well, you've certainly matured. Got some backbone now. Probably eyeing up my daughter. I'll tell you straight, don't rush into things. Work with me for a year or two. Show what you're made of. Maybe then I'll change my mind, Kevin Adamson remarked with a smile. Thomas visibly blushed and became flustered. He awkwardly cleared his throat and hurriedly changed the subject. Wedding bells aren't ringing for me yet, Kevin Adamson. Right now, I need to get back on my feet first and bring value to the company. I didn't spend all that time studying for nothing. You've got the right attitude, Thomas. Right on the mark. We really need quality deposits now more than ever. And capable geologists wouldn't hurt. So, get involved and I'll prepare you for the expedition, Kevin replied. Remembering those brighter days, Emily wiped away a bitter tear. How good things had been back then, the birds singing in her soul. But now, only sadness and endless longing. Thomas hadn't listened to her father then, but he pursued her again, this time for real flowers, gifts, dates. At first, Emily had taken Thomas's courtship for granted, like a joke, a friendly gesture, suggesting going to the movies. But later, she developed sincere feelings for him and looked at him with different eyes. By that time, Ed Miller was actively pursuing her, whom she had met during university. He was a prominent and wealthy young man, but overflowing with arrogance and confidence. Understandable, with a businessman father. More influential than Kevin would ever be. But for Emily, it meant absolutely nothing. Money doesn't buy happiness. Besides, she didn't particularly need anything then. But it was difficult for Thomas to compete with Ed. What chance did a young geologist have against a rich man who could shower Emily with gifts every day? So Thomas had to resort to unpredictability, things that took her breath away and made her heart ready to burst. Like the date on the rooftop of a high-rise, where Thomas managed to haul up a table with chairs and a huge vase of flowers. That evening was forever etched in Emily's memory. Ah, if only she could turn back time. She would never have let Thomas go on that expedition for anything in the world. But Kevin Adamson was quite optimistic. We're counting on you, Thomas. Off to a new place you go. The route is tough, I'll warn you up front. So keep in mind, it won't be a walk in the park. We really need a good spot right now. So, can you deliver? Thomas smiled. I'll help, of course. How else could it be? We're a team after all. Challenges? Well, I'm used to that. Kevin Adams looked respectfully at the young geologist and gave a nod of approval. Employees like him were worth their weight in gold, driven and ambitious. Promise them career advancement, and they'll move mountains. Hint at marrying off his daughter, and they'll do everything possible to please. Kevin Adams likened this tactic to dangling a carrot in front of a trusting donkey. Whether Thomas knew he was that donkey remained a mystery. Emily never imagined she could be used as bait. But now, there was no point in pondering what was already clear. Sitting at the wedding table, Emily couldn't help but think of Thomas, who, according to her father, had vanished during a glacier avalanche in the gorge. Rumor had it that shortly before his death, he had sent word to the mainland about discovering a rich gold vein. Kevin Adams had been overjoyed then. But the joy turned out to be premature. Thomas and his assistant perished in the gorge, swept away by a wave of ice and rock fragments. Even now, 2 years after the tragedy, Emily couldn't hold back her tears. "Dad, how can this be? Can't we organize a rescue expedition? We can't just sit here and do nothing." Kevin Adams frowned. "And what am I supposed to do, huh? That region where Thomas went, it's uncharted, you understand? You see, a glacier avalanche, that's an unstoppable avalanche that sweeps away everything in its path. I sent people, of course, but it was all in vain. Maybe come spring I'll send another expedition. I really want to find that vein Thomas talked about. Assuming it even exists." Tears welled up in his daughter's eyes. "All you care about is your gold. You only think about your pocket, but a man has died, don't you understand?" "Of course I understand. But if it weren't for my gold, you wouldn't be getting your hair done in salons and dining in restaurants right now. You'd be working dawn till dusk. And who's to say that salary would have been enough for you?" the businessman replied rather harshly. Emily pursed her lips defensively. She understood her father's point, but why Thomas? Why couldn't someone else have gone on that ill-fated expedition? She had no answer to that question. And even now, sitting next to her husband, her thoughts were only of Thomas. After the death of his daughter's fiancé, Kevin Adams didn't lose his composure and quickly redirected his attention to Ed. His father also stood firmly on his feet, and there were funds available for developing the deposit. With a partner like Charlie met, there was nothing to fear. And Kevin understood this better than anyone else. Therefore, when Ed hinted that he intended to marry Emily, he did not resist. Especially after hearing about the serious illness. Kevin Adams always considered himself a strong person, but upon learning the terrible diagnosis, he felt fear for the first time. How could this be? He had lived and enjoyed life for so many years, and now what? Would it all disappear into nothingness? He was once a man, and now he might be gone. Lord, fate is so cruel. Hastily agreeing to give his daughter to Ed in marriage, Kevin did not know the most important thing. Charlie Met was already eyeing his company, which he intended to take over after the father-in-law's death. The main thing is to seize the business. If Ed wants to live with Emily, I won't stand in the way. If not, let the bride go wherever she wants. I won't hold her back, thought the businessman upon receiving the news of Kevin Adams's serious illness. This information was provided by a reliable individual who worked at the same clinic where the businessman was undergoing examinations. Charlie Met rubbed his hands contentedly, then moved another chess piece on the board, thereby threatening the imaginary opponent's king. Look how everything is falling into place. Adams is ill, Ed has become a member of his family. In another situation, I wouldn't have believed in such miracles, but now it's quite possible. Emily knew nothing of all this and believed that Ed's haste to marry her was driven by his own ambitions and to earn another notch in the universally recognized macho karma. Sitting at the festive table, Emily involuntarily touched her neck, where not long ago a golden ring had hung, given to her by Thomas on the day of his departure. He had ordered 2 rings from the jeweler with tiny engravings. "These are our initials." "I wanted to emphasize that," the guy said, handing Emily the ring. The trinket clearly wasn't expensive, but its value was far from that. Oh Lord, why did I give the ring to a tramp? It's a memory. Although, how long can one live in the past? Every day I tormented my soul with memories. This couldn't go on forever. Let this ring bring benefit to a beggar, Emily mentally persuaded herself, trying not to think about the fact that a couple of hours ago she became the wife of an unloved man. Ed, on the other hand, felt absolutely magnificent, getting drunk right before everyone's eyes. Gazing at the bride with a lustful look, he imagined the upcoming wedding night, and his heart filled with joy. He also remembered very well the times when his position wasn't as secure as it was now. And all because of Thomas, so he wouldn't be left with nothing. Having another shot of cognac, Ed involuntarily plunged into anxious memories. And he really had something to remember, because it was he who, upon learning about Thomas's upcoming expedition to unexplored territory, decided to get rid of his competitor in one fell swoop. For this purpose, Ed, upon his father's advice, began to search for the weakest link among the expedition participants. Initially, his choice fell on Thomas's deputy and also his right hand, Raymond Van. But after studying his biography in detail, he realized it wouldn't work. Raymond was too principled. A match for the leader. Equally crazy and ambitious. No, I can't take that risk. We need someone else. Someone we can absolutely trust. Otherwise, if Thomas returns from this expedition victorious, I'll never see Emily again. Actually, let Thomas not return at all. But for that, we need someone with extraordinary motivation, Ed thought at that time. And then he happened to learn quite by chance that one of the expedition members had serious problems. Specifically, a sick mother who had been in the hospital for 2 months by then. Upon hearing what Ed proposed, Sean Miller visibly hesitated. Oh, come on, how is that possible? I can't just remove the expedition leader, Sean frowned. Ed smirked. I'm not saying it will be easy. Just don't let Tom get distracted and record the coordinates. Whatever happens, the gold mine must belong to my family, understood? And while you play the part of a traveler, I'll help your mother. Deal? Sean paled but nodded in agreement. Ed gave him a reassuring pat on the shoulder. Little did he know then that none of them would return from that expedition. Certainly, the secret of the gold mine remained unsolved. But Ed found solace in something entirely different. Even though he didn't find the gold, Emily became his wife. And that meant not all was lost in his life. As expected, he didn't fulfill his promise to help Sean's mother. In simpler terms, Ed deceived the trusting young man who perished in an avalanche along with the other expedition members. Unfortunately, Sean's mother outlived her son by only 2 weeks, passing away 3 days shy of her 50th birthday. All of this flashed before Ed's eyes like scenes from a silent movie. Oh well, we'll send out another expedition soon, and then the gold will surely be ours. That fool Tess thinks I'll come to his rescue. Keep your pocket open wide. She'll simply become my property, Ed thought to himself. Meanwhile, he couldn't shake the feeling that the face of the young vagrant with the dog seemed vaguely familiar. Where could he have seen him before? Well, if he were to shave and clean up, then he could be certain whether he'd seen him or not. All right, I give up on that beggar. It's my celebration today, and I'm thinking about some nonsense, Ed thought, slamming his fist on the table. The alcohol had already taken its toll, making the businessman's head spin and his blood boil like molten magma. At that very moment, Charlie was approaching the pawnshop that Mia had told him about. Unbeknownst to the vagabond, Ruby had escaped from Jack and followed him. Aware of his owner's potential punishment, the smart dog kept a respectable distance, ensuring Charlie wouldn't notice and send him away again. Ruby's concerns were not unfounded. Charlie didn't want the dog trailing him into the pawnshop and causing a commotion. Owners of such establishments disliked animals wandering around and would start yelling and waving their hands upon seeing a dog at the door. Charlie climbed the steps and opened the door. Inside the pawnshop, it was cramped and uncomfortable. The appraiser, a pale man in his 30s with darting eyes, looked hopefully at the newcomer. Charlie nodded, then reached into his pocket for the note Mia had written. He must be mute, the pawnshop employee disappointedly thought. But when the appraiser read the note and saw the thin corded ring in the guest's hand, his eyes greedily lit up. Interested in the ring, are you? I've already sold it to a jeweler. What you've brought looks similar, but certainly not from the same series, the appraiser lied without blinking an eye. Charlie looked at him questioningly, as if to say, are you sure about that? Could you be mistaken? But the appraiser had deftly snatched the ring from Charlie's open palm and began examining it under the light of the desk lamp, studying it through a plastic-framed magnifying glass. In truth, the appraiser intentionally lied to Charlie. It was his habit to set aside items made of good gold in a separate drawer, intended for sale to private jewelers. One such jeweler was due to arrive today to collect another batch of gold. Thus, the appraiser was noticeably nervous, eager to deal with this silent vagrant as quickly as possible. What are you planning to do with it next? Sell it? Look, if it's stolen, you'll get into trouble. But if you pawn it to me, we can exchange it without any paperwork. Less witnesses, you see? Understand? Though I'll give you less than others would. But no one will come looking for you, the appraiser said hurriedly. Charlie looked at the cunning man before him with undisguised irritation. He immediately realized this dealer intended to cheat him, offering only a pittance for the item. No, let the ring stay with him for now. Perhaps for better times, as they say. If you don't want to sell, that's your right, but don't bring stolen goods to me again. You won't cross my threshold. I'm risking my reputation for you, practically walking a tightrope, and you're still not satisfied. Now get out of here. Take your ring with you, the appraiser erupted, practically throwing Charlie out. The vagrant was about to leave when he collided with a tall elderly man in the doorway. Startled, Charlie dropped the ring from his hand, and it fell right at the visitor's feet. Well now, hold on, croaked the man, and bending down, he picked up the ring. Charlie looked at the visitor imploringly, but the man didn't even flinch. Instead, he extended his hand to the vagrant and introduced himself. Leon Lusovic Tyler, master jeweler. Charlie cautiously shook his narrow, dry hand with long fingers and then glanced at the ring. He's mute, Leon Lusovic. He's brought me another item. I dare say it's identical to the ring I sold you 2 days ago. The letters T and E intertwined. See, the appraiser sniffed the scent of profit. Charlie immediately shot him a disapproving look. Yes, I see it's identical to the one you recently sold me, my boy. No surprise there, since I personally crafted 2 such rings for a young man. When was it again? At least 2 years ago, the jeweler adjusted his horn-rimmed glasses on his nose. He then gently took Charlie by the forearm and led him outside. Phew, it's stuffy in there. I don't fancy that pawn shop much, I'll tell you. But what can you do? Need to get gold from somewhere, and this hustler gives me a good discount. Understandable, he has his cut, of course. Oh well. Don't think ill of it. I'm not judging you, God forbid. But where did you get this ring from? Charlie sadly pointed to his lips, indicating his muteness, then asked the jeweler for a piece of paper and a pen. After reading what the young vagrant had written, Leon Lusovic fell into thought. These 2 rings were made for a young geologist, but clearly not for Charlie. Then who was the rightful owner? Could he have disposed of such a valuable purchase meant for a beloved person? Twirling the ring in his hand, Leon Lusovic handed it back to Charlie. Here, please take it. I have no use for someone else's. But if the history of this item matters to you, I can check my records at home for the customer's name. I've been in the jewelry business for about 30 years. A satisfied smile lit up Charlie's face. Perhaps the customer's name and surname on these rings would finally help him remember his past. Leon Lusovic smiled back and without hesitation led the homeless man off the street. The jeweler wasn't afraid of being robbed. Years in the business had taught him to see into people's souls as if through an X-ray. Charlie's heart was as pure as a dewdrop on an alpine meadow at dawn. And so, without doubt, the elderly man brought him home. You can wash up in the bathroom, it's straight down the hall. Then I'll wait for you at the table. It's just me and my grandson here, so we don't have guests often, Leon Lusovic explained, opening the door. Soon, Leon Lusovic's 7-year-old grandson Archie entered the kitchen. Smiling at the guest, he sat down on a free chair and started eating. Archie's parents died when he was just 2 years old. It was a car accident, may they rest in peace. They tried to pass another car, and, well, Heaven's Kingdom, you know, the jeweler explained, intercepting Charlie's questioning look. The vagabond sadly looked at the boy, whose only remaining relative was his grandfather. Though such a relative must have cost a pretty penny, judging by the room's decorations and the rich interior of the house. Well, the exterior, too. After the meal, Leon Lusovic suggested, since it's already evening, I propose we rest a bit and then start going through my records. You understand, we need to go through the archives. And I'm quite tired. That appraiser is cunning too, always thinking of ways to outsmart me. So, what do you say? You don't mind staying over? You can sleep on that beautiful couch in the living room. Charlie nodded eagerly and thanked his host with a grateful smile. He had grown tired of sleeping in basements and abandoned houses, so Leon Lusovic's offer seemed like a fantasy come true. Suddenly, Archie, who had been calm until then, jumped up from his chair and ran to the window. Grandpa, look. There's a dog outside, a big one. Has it come to visit us? I don't know, grandson. Isn't this young man's dog by any chance? Charlie approached the window and cursed silently. Of course, it was Ruby, trailing him like a talented detective from Sherlock Holmes's time. Grandpa, can I play with him, please? He's so nice and has kind eyes. Please, begged Archie. All right. Let him in. It's your call, little one. I don't think this dog will harm us, Leon Lusovic conceded, heading towards the door. Within minutes, Ruby was already wagging his tail around the laughing Archie, trying to lick his nose or cheek. I've never seen him so happy. It's understandable. I'm always in the workshop, and he has no one to play with, remarked the owner with admiration. Charlie gratefully placed his hand over his heart to show his respect. Meanwhile, at the appraiser's pawnshop, a rather tense conversation awaited with a couple of criminals who had come seeking information. Well, Sean, got anything worthwhile? But it better be guaranteed. Your cheap tricks are getting old, began the older of the robbers. Translator furrowed his brow and began mentally reviewing those who, according to the criminals, fit the role of a fat catfish. One had a whole security detail, another kept 3 mastiffs, and then there was the third. Of course, why hadn't he thought of him immediately? That pompous dandy, Leon Lusovic. Let the jeweler deal with those thugs, he would observe from the sidelines and claim his share after a successful raid. Few knew that Sean had long been in cahoots with a criminal gang, providing them addresses of wealthy individuals who bought gold from him at inflated prices. That's why he had no doubts as he gave away Leon Lusovic's address, wanting to exact revenge for the vagabond who had snatched a ring from under his nose. Oh, a jeweler. That's a fine little catch. No dogs? Living with a 7-year-old kid? This is a real gift. You're sharp, Sean. No wonder you're making your bread, remarked one of the criminals. Sean smiled his unpleasant smile and imagined the treasure troves of the elderly jeweler, akin to Aladdin's cave, where countless riches were stored. Meanwhile, completely unaware that armed robbers were heading to his home, Leon Lusovic was trying to locate a ledger containing the details of ring owners. Archie was busy with Ruby in the children's room, while Charlie helped the jeweler sort through his archives. A knock on the door made the dog prick up its ears and growl deeply. Who could that be so late? Leon Lusovic asked in surprise, heading towards the door. Charlie anxiously watched him, then heard the distinct click of the lock, and the hallway instantly filled with strange shouts. To the wall, old man. I said move it. Where's the gold, you rat? Don't give me those wide-eyed looks. I'll say it again, where are the money and the gold, growled one of the gang. At that moment, fierce barking erupted from the children's room, and someone swift and very angry rushed into the fray. Charlie, too, didn't stand idly by. Grabbing a hefty stool, he rushed to aid the elderly owner. What's going on? They said the old man didn't have a dog. Sean, you scum, set us up, you bastard. Ruby tore into the villains like a lioness surrounded by a pack of hyenas. Their shouts immediately drew the attention of neighbors, who decided to call the police. Realizing the heist was falling apart, one of the robbers pulled a pistol from his pocket and aimed it at Ruby. No, don't you dare, you scum, Charlie shouted and lunged at the enemy with bare hands. A shot rang out, filling the air with the sharp smell of gunpowder. Charlie froze, then looked down and saw that the bullet had missed, striking the polished parquet floor of the living room. Ruby was alive. One of the gang members, realizing his defeat, swung and struck Charlie on the head with the butt of his shotgun. The blow was clumsy, as at that moment Ruby grabbed the gangster by the ankle, causing him to lose his balance and collapse to the floor. Nonetheless, the blow was enough to make Charlie's head spin and fill his mouth with the metallic taste of blood. Charlie didn't hear the sirens of the approaching police cars. Sitting on the floor, he tried to stem the blood flowing from a gash near his temple. Within 5 minutes, it was all over. The handcuffed gang members, thoroughly bruised, were led away, and Ruby, still joyfully barking, was locked in the pantry to prevent him from turning his aggression toward the law enforcement officers. Only after everything had calmed down did the police notice the body of an elderly jeweler lying on the floor in an unnatural pose, his knees bent. One of them checked for a pulse and shook his head sadly. Leonid Lvovich showed no visible wounds or bruises. His heart had failed him, unable to withstand the shock of the attack. One of the officers picked up the tearful Archie and carried him towards a patrol car parked outside the house, while Charlie remained sitting on the floor, trying to regain his senses and cope with the dizziness. And then Charlie saw himself standing in the middle of a snow-covered plain, with majestic cold stretching beyond. He tensed and whispered softly, "Gold vein. Expedition." Tears streamed from his eyes, and his lips trembled traitorously. In that moment, Charlie remembered everything. Above all, he remembered that his name wasn't Charlie at all, but Raymond Van. The re-traumatization from the robber's blow had unleashed a storm of emotions and memories of days, months, and years gone by. Now the wanderer knew for certain that he was not called Charlie, but Raymond Van. For many months, he had been the right hand of the expedition leader, venturing to conquer new lands and uncharted territories. Fragments of the past flashed before his eyes. Here he was with Thomas and Sean walking along a gorge, there crossing a river, and here struggling to escape a landslide. It all felt like a horrifying dream. Amidst the deafening ringing in his ears, Raymond's desperate cry was drowned out when a wave knocked Thomas off his feet and dragged him down the slope. Raymond covered his eyes and grasped his head in his hands. Here he was trying to pull Thomas out from under a massive slab that had crushed his body from above. "Leave me, Raymond. Go. The second wave is coming down now, and you won't get out of here alive. If Sean survived, go with him. Make it to the Great Land and give Kevin Adam the coordinates of the gold deposit. Stop it. You'll survive, do you hear me?" "I'll help you right now," Raymond shouted, trying not to pay attention to the deafening crack above his head. Thomas closed his eyes, then gathered his remaining strength and extended his hand to his comrade, holding a ring in it. "Here, give this to Emily. She will understand." Tears streamed down Raymond's cheeks. Perhaps he would never have left this cursed canyon if it weren't for Sean, who was more cautious. They had been climbing out together, tired and worn. They decided against calling Kevin. Sean dissuaded Raymond, saying such news should be delivered in person. Raymond agreed, unaware that Sean was playing his own game, aiming to benefit from Ed. As they sat on the train, Sean gave Raymond a strange look, as if deciding whether to proceed with his plan. They traveled for days. As their destination approached, Sean grew increasingly nervous. Unfortunately, the young geologist didn't sense any threat from his companion and agreed to join him in the vestibule for some fresh air. It was there that Sean revealed his treacherous nature, disclosing that he had been working for Kevin Adams' competitors all along. "So, will you join my side? Trust me, Ed will welcome us like family." Raymond frowned and shook his head. The final station was about to appear, and Sean realized it was now or never. With a burst of rage, he attacked Raymond, attempting to throw him off the moving train. But he miscalculated and fell himself, tumbling several meters at full speed. Raymond experienced a brief moment of pain and darkness, awakening days later in a hospital room, cared for by a nurse named Mia. He didn't know what had happened to Sean. Most likely, the traitor had been less fortunate and perished. Now, Raymond, renamed Charlie by Mia's suggestion, a speechless wanderer, recalled every detail vividly, especially after surviving a robbery at the generous Leon Lucevich's house. Clutching his fists, Raymond rose from the floor and stepped into the night, leading Ruby, who for the first time heard her master's voice. The wedding had passed, and the newlyweds smoothly moved into the house gifted by the groom's father. There was no talk of a wedding night, as Ed was thoroughly intoxicated and had to be carried to bed. Deep down, Emily was relieved at this outcome, feeling nothing but indifference bordering on contempt towards Ed. After tucking the groom in, she retreated to another room and locked the door. There, she let her tears flow freely, unaware that her father was entertaining a very peculiar guest. "Raymond, is that you? But you perished in the canyon with Thomas," exclaimed Kevin. The guest smiled knowingly. "Alive as you see, but Thomas is dead. But that's not the main thing. There was a traitor among us. He worked for Ed Taylor and his father." The businessman turned pale and pressed his back against the wall. "Oh Lord, is this really possible? The Taylors were his partners, and now they're family too." But Raymond's story put everything into place. Kevin Adams listened silently, astonished by the deceit and duplicity of his two-faced companions. When Raymond mentioned his son's death, tears welled up in the businessman's eyes. That evening, they stayed up almost until midnight. Ruby spent all that time running around the yard, trying to explore every hidden corner. And the next morning, Kevin Adams called his daughter and asked her to come home. By then, Raymond had taken a bath, shaved, and tidied himself up completely. Emily barely remembered him, having seen him only a couple of times, briefly during Thomas's expedition farewells. Raymond's tale triggered a hysterical reaction in her, especially after the part where the young geologist spoke of Thomas's final request. "Oh Lord, he loved me right until his last breath, and I betrayed him. I got rid of the ring. Married that scoundrel. And more. Daddy, I'm pregnant. I took the test this morning," Emily sobbed, exclaiming. "Pregnant? But you've barely spent any time together. Though it only seems that way. Time flies unnoticed," Kevin Adams said softly. Raymond felt uncomfortable being the sole survivor among the expedition members. Strange luck, indeed. Especially considering what the boy had been through after being rescued from the ravine. "It's all right, we'll show those Taylors. Thanks to Thomas's sacrifice, we now know the coordinates of the gold deposit. This means our company will reach a whole new level. And even if I don't live to see it, you'll manage it, my dear. You can cry and have your fits, but we must be strong, you hear me? For your baby and my grandchild. And if it's a girl, we'll name her after your mother," Kevin Adams declared passionately, slamming his hand on the table. Raymond stepped aside awkwardly and sat down on a chair. Over the past few days, he had become very tired and could barely stand from exhaustion. One thing he was certain of, the Adams family intended to defend their company by any means necessary. Which meant Ed Taylor was in for a fair reckoning for all his misdeeds. A year passed. During this time, Raymond not only became a part of the Kalin family, but also gave his surname to Emily's newborn son. She finalized her divorce from Ed a month after their wedding. And just a month later, she went with Raymond to that very place to see her fiancé's death site with her own eyes. It was summer, and this land enjoyed brief warmth and gentle sun. It was there that Emily and Raymond encountered a real surprise. As it turned out, Thomas hadn't died 3 years ago. On the contrary, he survived and was rescued by one of the locals. For many months, Thomas had teetered on the brink of life and death before he was able to stand on his own feet. During all that time, he was cared for by a girl named Olivia. As fate would have it, over the months of their acquaintance, Thomas had grown deeply attached to his rescuer, and thoughts of returning to the mainland visited him less and less frequently. The image of Emily and Raymond now seemed ethereal, unreal to Thomas. After all, if he was so needed by all of them, why hadn't his loved ones found him yet? Day by day, Thomas's belief in Emily's love faded in his soul like a dying candle. Tired of waiting for help from the big land, he bound his life with Olivia, to whom he was deeply indebted. Over time, Thomas grew to love life in the settlement so much that he decided to stay here forever. By the time Raymond and Emily learned that he was alive, Olivia had already given birth to twins, which greatly delighted the young father. Emily held no grudge against Thomas, not at all. She didn't create scenes or tantrums when they met. Frankly, she now loved a completely different person, someone who had helped her in a difficult moment and supported the company after her sick father left. Thanks to Raymond's involvement and support, the Adams family managed to outdo their competitors, leading to Ed Taylor ending up in the defendant's seat. No, not for the incident with the expedition, not at all. This cunning fellow had committed so many small and large sins that they would have sufficed for several decades behind barbed wire. For one of these sins, he ended up in one of the country's colonies, where the gold vein passed so close that there was no need to organize an expedition to find it. Raymond, returning home with Emily, decided to do what he had been thinking about for the past few months, take guardianship over the grandson of the late jeweler Leon Lusovic Archie. Emily, as a loving wife should, supported him in everything. And so, one fine day, she became the mother of 2 children, 8-year-old Archie and 6-month-old Timmy. For many years, this was the family happiness she had dreamed of. But Ruby was the most thrilled about the addition to the Adams family, surrendering himself to the power of the restless children, basking in the sun, enjoying the tastiest food, and reveling in his canine happiness. Raymond also remembered his savior, Jack Smith, hiring him as a night guard at their firm with Emily.